Did you know that St. Luke's University Health Network, based in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, has been recognized by the U.S. government as the highest performing health system in the United States for quality? You heard right. St. Luke's #1 recognition affirms our status as the top leader among the most respected healthcare providers in the nation, including Houston Methodist and the Mayo Clinic. To state it simply, if you want to receive the best care when you go to a hospital, come to St. Luke's.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
From the powerhouse blowtorch signal of Talk Radio 77 WABC, welcome once again, and thank you for spending time with us as we move deeper into your weekend. The solemn weekend, Memorial Day 2026. Ladies and gentlemen, I implore you to do something. On Monday, Memorial Day at 3 p.m., let us all call for a moment of silence in memory of all the veterans, men and women who've given their life to the greatest country in the world, the United States of America, as we move in just a month or so to the celebration of 250 years. Welcome to the Dr. Sky Experience, a show about the mysteries from the great realms of astronomy, space, aviation, weather, with celebrity guests and stories, of course, of American exceptionalism. We like to call these 2 hours a theater of the mind, because obviously it brings up the great subject of imagination. A show where you can actually learn something new each week is our primary goal, with critical thinking and with dialogue. And we appreciate everybody out there, and especially to all those who work the midnight shift, live alone, drive the trucks, police, first responders, hospital workers, etc. Welcome to the Dr. Sky Experience. Get in early on the conversation at 1-800-848-9222, or simply 1-800-848-WABC, of course. And while you're at it, why not download the WABC app? Makes the listening and learning experience even quicker, and we certainly appreciate that. But I'd like to thank our helmsmen, ladies and gentlemen, primarily Bill and Vinny, navigating this powerful signal across the void of the universe, a radio station that's been in existence for what? Some 105 years, heard in 178 countries, all 50 states, and I'm sure you'll be pleased with some of the new things that you'll be hearing on this radio station, and in my world itself especially. We talk about broadcasting out into the deep cosmos. Tonight's adventure, as we continue on the Dr. Sky Experience, another edition with a regular friend of ours of the radio show, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition, talking about what's the latest in the news world. Many great revelations about what's happening in climate science, and who better to go to than he. Mr. Harris lives and works in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. He has 30 years' experience as a mechanical engineer, project manager, science and technology communications professional, and a technical trainer. He was science and technology advisor to former opposition senior environment critic in Canada's Parliament from 2006 to 2008. He was the executive director of the Natural Resource Stewardship Project in Canada, and his website is easy to be found at icsc-canada.com. That's icsc-canada.com. A hearty welcome to you, Tom Harris, as we here in America mark the solemn weekend of Memorial Day. Thank you for joining us from your home in Canada. How are you?
I'm great. Having just watched the launch of the latest Starship, it was quite an exciting launch, that's for sure.
It sure is, and I want to do a little mixed bag on this radio show just to let the audience know that with your background and the subject matter that many people expect to hear on the Dr. Sky Experience, we're going to go later and journey into this launch. If you haven't seen it by now, it's all over YouTube and all other the broadcast channels, and of course, in the vivid, beautiful 8K that you can see on many TV stations, or maybe even in your 100-inch TV. But you know what I think, Tom? That's going to take the valuation and make more credence of SpaceX's $1.75 trillion IPO valuation I guess something's coming up, in about a month or so that they're going to go public. Is that pretty an accurate statement?
Geez, I don't know. That sounds like something we've got to get in on, though, because, they're doing great. If they get the NASA contract to actually provide the lunar lander, and it looks like they have a really good chance of it based on today's launch, they're going to be a very profitable company, that's for sure. And Elon will be even more the richest person on Earth.
Absolutely. Maybe the first trillionaire, at least in modern times, because if we look at the wealthiest person ever to exist, it goes back, I think, thousands of years ago when allegedly, and I don't have the name in front of me, the individual had much in the way of gold and silver, which, of course, is still a valuable commodity to so many people.
Oh, for sure. I guess that was Midas.
With the golden touch.
King Midas, yeah.
Absolutely. But we're going to go into other areas, too, on the radio show with your experience and your comment. Naturally, everybody's been hearing about the UFO and UAP situation. And to be very frank with you, some are tired of hearing about this, but hold the phone, ladies and gentlemen. Don't change that dial, because we're going to delve into this in a little bit and talk about some of the newest revelations out there, fact or fiction, and so many other things. And also, I know you probably know this also, Tom, NASA's SpaceX booster, one of the booster rockets from a rocket that launched a few years ago, is being intentionally launched and crashed into the moon, will be intentionally sent and crashed into the moon by August the 5th. And that's something of interest to many people. You may wonder, why are they going to do that? And so many of the other stories. And how about this in the space world? And we'll continue on with climate, because remember, in my humble opinion, and I'm sure Tom would agree, all weather comes from the sun. Get set, ladies and gentlemen, for a massive sunspot group soon to emerge from the left edge of the sun as the sun rotates it into view. This is one of the largest, late in the game for solar cycle 25, but who knows what will happen there. But Tom Harris, let's continue to talk about the subjects that we normally talk about here. And by the way, if you have an interest, ladies and gentlemen, seeing any guests that we might be able to get, we can't guarantee them all, or if you have an email, pro or con on anything we talk about here, my personal email here, and proud to report it, is just DRSKY, Dr. Sky, at, of course, WABCradio.com. There's an interesting article, Tom, circulating around the world, and the tagline goes like this: scientists no longer believe the most apocalyptic climate scenario will actually happen. Take us down the road on that, because I was texted that particular article about a week or two ago, and I'm fascinated to hear your perspective on this as we open our minds on this subject.
Yeah, early in the 2000s, there was a representative concentration pathway, they call them. These are scenarios that they forecast what will greenhouse gases do in the future if they have certain kinds of development. And this one, which was called RCP, which is representative concentration pathway, it was called RCP 8.5. And it was highly unrealistic. It forecast a 500% increase in coal use, for example. It forecasted the population of the world, not until the year 2100. It forecast that the population of the world would be 12 billion in 2100. Now they're saying it'll probably be about 10.3 billion. Okay. But what's happened is that none of their forecasts in the first quarter of the 21st century have come true. For it to meet a 500% rise by the year 2100, we would have had to increase our coal use in this first 26 years. We'd have had to increase it by about 100%. In fact, it only increased by about 10%. And of course, the population is not increasing as fast. So it turns out this scenario, which is called RCP 8.5, was used in tens of thousands of research papers, which then translated into many thousands of headlines and scary news, policies by government all over the world, and they're now saying, no, it's totally implausible. We haven't been increasing our coal use like that. We haven't been increasing our population like that. The whole thing is built on sand, because that was the business as usual. I mean, today they're calling it the most extreme scenario, but if you actually look at, 20 or 15 years ago, you find that they were treating it as a business as usual scenario, and that led to all the exciting headlines that tell us about massive temperature changes up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, for example. That was what was supposed to happen. Now they're saying with the more likely scenarios, they call them CMIP 7 medium, we're talking about less than half as much warming. So suddenly, the forecasts they had are ridiculous. We knew they were ridiculous in the first place, but of course the media loved it because it allowed them to forecast a 10-degree Fahrenheit warming. But now they're saying it's going to be less than half of that.
Interesting. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what we do here on the Dr. Sky Experience is we throw out a question or comment, and we want to see how you respond to it. So basically, in the generic sense, your opinion on the whole climate situation, fact or fiction from your perspectives. And I think locally, Tom, this is interesting. So many people are so concerned. There's a big political issue. Electric and gas and those rates that people are paying. Some are just unbelievable. And as we depend more on electric vehicles, as some people might depend on, and the production and these building of AI data centers, as we've talked about with other great guests, I wonder what you, ladies and gentlemen, think about this. Because, again, it may hit your pocketbook if things go in a different direction. And we're here with Tom Harris of the International Climate Science Coalition to answer those questions. But to get into the theater of the mind, our number, as always, 1-800-848-9222. So, many of the alarmists out there that may be clamoring for all these changes, and again, I have respect if you disagree with the topic, or it's like what our special guest is saying.
The global temperature rise of 1.
We would love to be able to have that in a conversation. So, Tom, continue on that particular story, because I find it interesting, because so many times in the past few years, it's been climate change, climate change, climate change. We all better worry because it's all human-caused, or mostly human-caused. Continue and respond to this. This is interesting.
Yeah, there's some very new ice core studies. And, of course, what they do is they drill down as far as Lake Vostok, which is hugely deep under the East Antarctic, and they can then pull up these ice cores that are many kilometers long, and they can analyze them for CO2, looking at the bubbles that are trapped there, and they also use isotopes to figure out what the temperatures were likely. And so they had two of these particular ice cores. One was 420,000 years, and the other was 800,000 years. And they actually had a look at him, and a fellow by the name of Les Hatton, he's an emeritus professor in Kingston University in the UK. He actually looked at the last 10,000 years. Let's see, 10,000? No, it's 20,000. That's right. He looked at the last 200 centuries. And what he found was quite interesting. He found that 16% of them, in other words, 32 centuries, actually had the same amount of warming or more warming than we've had in the past century. And, it's interesting because he points out that, look, we're told that not only is this unusual, it's caused by greenhouse gases, but that doesn't make any sense. So he wrote a paper, and it's interesting because he's an emeritus professor, so they can't fire him. He's already finished his career. Correct. His paper was titled, "Is a 1.1 degrees Celsius rise in a century unusual? A study of interglacials from the Epoca Vostok dataset." And, he found that 32 centuries of the past 200 were actually warming as fast as today or faster. And, of course, that's long, long before any industrial activities were going on. So he asked the question, he says, well, they're constantly trying to determine if we have caused this incredible temperature rise. Well, first of all, it's not incredible. It's happened 32 times already in the last 20,000 years, which, geologically is like yesterday. And, the idea that CO2 is causing it, well, that's a real good question, because another ice core study that came out looking at 3 million years of temperature data, it found that even though there were huge variations in temperature going in and out of glacials, when all of Canada and the northern part of the United States were covered with miles of ice, there was almost no change in CO2 and methane. So these two findings, both from ice cores from the Antarctic, really, they show that the whole climate thing is built on sand, like we were saying earlier.
That's interesting. Yes, and let the audience know this, too. I mean, we've studied Antarctica many times, and we'll have other shows and other guests talking about some of the great mysteries there, which is very interesting. But Lake Vostok, describe it to the audience. It's actually way deep under the surface ice of Antarctica. And many believe, with obviously flowing water down there, or even a semi-frozen state, that there may be another world down there. Now, not to be conspiratorial, they're finding evidence of forests that are underneath. So there's a lot of changes that have happened. And the reason I bring that up, so you can qualify this, is that the Earth, as we talk about so many times, has been through these horrific changes, volcanism, asteroidal impacts. But simply this, just like a man on the street. Mother Earth, what? Tom, has this incredible healing capability, not an excuse to go out and, burn tires in the street or throw garbage in the street. But the point is, emphasize that again to listeners that may also believe that what they've heard maybe in school, to the younger people out there, that it's all man-made and it's all people doing this for the increase in CO2. Give us more information on that, because I think I brought up a lot of that long statement.
Yeah, for sure. The interesting thing is that Lake Vostok is a huge under ice lake. And I mean, it's huge. It's as big as the Great Lakes. It's 670 meters deep, okay? So it's very deep. And it was actually, it dates back from about 500,000 years ago, because since then we've had 500,000 years of ice on top of it, but the lake is still there. So it'll be really intriguing to see if they actually have life forms that are living in this lake. It's liquid water, from 500,000 years ago. So that is where they've drilled down to. They've drilled down. Let's see, I'll get the exact number here. They cored 3,623 meters. So that's 3.6 kilometers. So that would be something like 2 miles down. They drilled
That's
2
a long
miles
way.
through the ice. Yeah, they drilled 2 miles through the ice, and they came to this Lake Vostok. And at the same time, they were able to pull up ice that was almost 500,000 years old and then do the analysis. And what they found, of course, was these different things. They found that, there used to be temperature changes that were much smaller than what we've seen in the last 100 years. And if we go back, let's say 50,000 or 100,000 years, but in the last 20,000 years, it's been kind of special. There have been many times, as I said, 32 centuries had warming as fast as today. And so, of course, the idea then that we're experiencing unusual temperature change is simply not true. And the ice cores are showing that. But the other ice core is showing that even when there was huge temperature change going in and out of glacial periods, CO2 and methane stayed almost constant. So, these ice cores, besides, kind of exciting to explore a lake as big as Lake Ontario under under about 2 miles of ice, it'd be amazing to see if there's any life forms there.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue here with Tom Harris, obviously a gentleman that we've had here many times, by your request. I mean, this is interesting. I get lots of emails saying, bring back Tom. We want to hear his opinion on these various subjects. But it's so interesting. His website, that's ICSC-Canada. I got to ask this from the personal side. What got you interested in this subject and when? Because, it's not every day that I speak with somebody that has so much information on so many things, but you're fair, you're nonpartisan, and I like that. When did you get started in all this? Just tell us.
Yeah, sure. I've always been a space fan. I love Star Trek, and I was a newspaper boy, so I kept all the newspapers of the Mercury and the Gemini and the Apollo flights, awesome. And I met several of the astronauts who walked on the moon. I introduced Harrison Schmitt at a conference and had dinner with him. So I've always been a real great space exploration fan, and I was always looking for ways to promote the space program. And one of them, I thought, back in 1990 for Earth Day, would be good to look at how studying the planets helps us better understand the Earth. And, there's all kinds of examples. Yeah, one of the examples that I used was that the CO2, which is like the atmospheric pressure on Venus is 100 times that on Earth. And, we've got 90 some odd % carbon dioxide on Venus. And of course, Venus is very hot. So I wrote an article saying, hey, by exploring the planets and Venus in particular, we can get a preview of what's going to happen on the Earth if we're not careful and let CO2, rise and rise and rise. And a local professor of geology, he liked the article in general, but he said, no, but that particular point is wrong. What happened on Venus physically cannot happen on the Earth because the Earth has oceans that absorb CO2. And then the bottom of the oceans, there's plate tectonics that pull the surface of the ocean deep into the crust. And then, of course, it acts as a sponge to pull more CO2 out of the water. But Venus has no oceans. And the other thing, of course, as you know, is Venus rotates very slowly. A day on Venus is many months. So it sits there and it cooks and it cooks and it cooks.
And it rotates in retrograde or backwards, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes,
and so it doesn't cool off.
Strange.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Don't have a cool off every 24 hours the way we do on Earth. So, Venus has got lots of reasons why it's hot. And he said, but the CO2 issue, it was a contributor to Venus's warming, but what happened on Venus cannot happen on the Earth. And he explained why with respect to the oceans and that sort of thing. And I thought, well, who's this right-wing climate change denier? And so he invited me into his lab at Carleton University, and he showed me the geologic history that he had been finding, where, in fact, CO2, carbon dioxide, which is supposed to be this terrible greenhouse gas, it was not correlated at all with temperature over the geologic record. And so I looked into it more deeply. He gave me lots of references, and he showed me, and others showed me, that if you go back a 500 million years, you can go back about 600 million years with fossilized seashells, analyzing oxygen isotopes and getting temperatures. What you find is that, for example, at 440 million years, it was very, very cold. In fact, some people even say that the oceans may have had ice on them. But, CO2 was 10 times higher than today, 10 times higher than today at one of the coldest periods. And so I looked at this record and I talked to other scientists, and what they showed was that CO2 and temperature had no consistent correlation over the last 500 million years. And you see that throughout the record, where at other times CO2 will be 13 times, in other words, 1,300% of today's levels. Not this measly 50% rise that we've had in the last 100.
You bring up good information, Tom, here, because that's one of the goals of the radio show. It's to bring new information. You learn something new. That's our goal, and we hope that's passed on to the listeners very simply. But when we talk about things quite in the opposite, 180-degree spectral change, when Ben Franklin said, as far as our country not being a democracy per se, but a republic, and his quote, many people may know, a republic if you can keep it, but simply this, a planet if you can keep it. And why not? Because if you look at the statistical information that our special guest is giving here, we'd love to hear if there's people that are on the contrarian side on this, and base your information, what we like to do when you get into the theater of the mind, get your best opportunity to get to that microphone, and you can do that by calling 1-800-848-9222, 1-800-848-9222, to get in on the conversation, because, Tom, this is interesting. The audience out there, we pose this question. The climate situation, fact or fiction, how will it affect your pocketbook? And more recently, more and more people, Tom, here in the United States that I talk to, maybe in Canada also, outrageous electric rates that people are getting and experiencing, gas and other things. And maybe some of the things like solar and wind power are not doing anywhere near what they should. That's an interesting subject here. But really quickly, before we go to the hard break, we got about a minute and a half, and I'd like you to carry this torch beyond that. Leah Zeldin, EPA Administrator, you mentioned in your last conversation with us that he broke some interesting news that kind of broke the chains of all the subject matter when there was a lot of climate denialism going on around the world. He brought something from the Trump administration right to the forefront. What was it in about a minute and a half?
Well, yeah, and what they're doing is they're rescinding the endangerment finding. Is that what you're talking about? Because that is,
Absolutely.
In fact, that's a very major thing. You see, I was asked the other day in an interview, what did I think was the origin of the climate scare to the degree it's gone today, which is really berserk. I mean, we're spending $5 billion a day on climate finance. It has really gone out of control. And the conclusion I came to is it really started in 2015. I mean, it started before that with Al Gore, but really hit hard in 2015 when Obama, actually, his administration brought in the endangerment finding, and they declared carbon dioxide as a pollutant that could be controlled under the Clean Air Act. Now, Representative Dingell, who actually was one of the originators of the Clean Air Act, he said CO2 was never supposed to be controlled as a pollutant. It was to control real pollution like sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, lead, mercury, things like that. But they distorted it by making it a pollutant that could be controlled under the Clean Air Act, and that led to a massive change in everything from your stoves.
And that's an
cars.
Interesting story, and I'd like you to continue that. Sorry to cut everybody short on that, but as you know, in time and space, the clock rules here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Your questions and comments, ladies and gentlemen, much appreciated here as we move into Memorial Day weekend. As I said before, wishing each and everyone a solemn Memorial Day weekend. Monday, Memorial Day, as many do, 3 p.m., a moment of silence, or any time you have a moment of silence, in memory of all of our veterans, men and women, who gave their lives to the greatest nation on earth, the United States of America. We'll be back with Tom Harris Your questions and comments on the Dr. Sky Experience. We like to call it a theater of the mind. So now is your chance to go to the snack bar before we continue.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. The Four Seasons is back for Season 2, starring Tina Fey, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, Marco Calvani, Carrie Kenny Silver, and Erica Henningsen. After a difficult year, your favorite group of friends continues their tradition of vacationing together, now with a baby in tow. From the Jersey Shore to upstate New York and Italy, their getaways are sure to take unexpected turns where comedy ensues. Watch The Four Seasons May 28th only on Netflix.
Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
People are spending way too much time thinking about climate change and way too little time thinking about AI. A quote from Peter Thiel, who has his finger into the AI button and on the AI button around the world. 31 minutes after the hour, we thank you again for joining us on this solemn Memorial Day weekend and spending time with us on the Dr. Sky Experience. We continue with Tom Harris, the Executive Director. He's our special guest and has been a repeat guest by everybody who's out there who sends us an email at drsky@wabcradio.com. And again, Tom, I appreciate it. Didn't want to cut you short there, but continue to talk more about Lee Zeldin. I think that's a very bold statement from the Trump administration on rescinding some of these things to kind of break the shackles and move us into what I think a much more prosperous economy, though many people may disagree with what I just said. But you continue, please.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Obama is really the origin of the current craziness around the world of climate change, because he was a very popular president with the media. And so after he announced this endangerment finding where CO2 was going to be considered a pollutant and could be controlled under the Clean Air Act, generally speaking, most media just lined up and they stopped publishing people like myself and Dr. Tim Ball and Ian Clark and Richard Lindzen from MIT. They just couldn't get published anymore because everybody lined up behind Obama. And the trouble was this endangerment finding, it made it so that it became much more expensive to make cars. Things like coal-fired power. Coal is one of the greatest energy sources. You pile up a year's supply on site. You don't have to rely on a pipeline, and you can use pollution control devices to make it clean. But what happened is these regulations that originated with the endangerment finding basically made it so it was no longer economic to build coal stations. And so many coal stations that were supposed to be built were canceled right after Obama's administration brought in this endangerment finding because they simply couldn't meet the standards without making massive changes to their plant. Now, what's going to happen now that Lee Zeldin and the EPA have rescinded the endangerment finding? It's going to open the door for coal-fired power plants to be built again. And that is so important. I mean, the United States is the Saudi Arabia of coal. You have enough coal to last for many, many centuries. I've heard 800 centuries or 1,000 years.
Sure.
And coal, as I said, if you use modern pollution control, you can actually generate electricity very cleanly. But if you had to collect all the CO2 and pump it underground, which is what they were starting to have to do with the endangerment finding, then you end up with a coal plant that's not worth building. And in fact, Bob Murray, who used to be the head of Murray Energy, I believe it was the largest independent coal company in the United States,
yes.
He said carbon sequestration, which is capturing CO2 from the effluents and putting it underground, he said carbon sequestration is code for no coal. because it's just too expensive. So now, hopefully, we're going to see a change to the power plant rules next. The first changes were endangerment finding with regards to automobiles, which is great. It's going to lower the automobile costs for sure. But we're hoping they extend it to cover power plants, because then we can start to build very inexpensive, very reliable coal plants, which had been stopped because of the endangerment finding.
Right. And the other side of the equation, Tom, I know you know so much about this, when we had these global contracts and agreements, everything was not looking that good if you wanted to control the amount of coal that was utilized in burning for fuel. China was violating it by building what? More coal plants every week and thumbing their nose at any of those agreements. So the point is, you can utilize coal, in your opinion, is what I'm hearing, and do it in a what? Safe, prosperous, and beneficial way, that it's not becoming one of the major pollutants out there. And I think that's a very interesting story. But I go back to Lee Zeldin because it kind of takes off the chains and shackles that we've had. Now we're able to expand this, and hopefully that everybody out there, listen up, ladies and gentlemen, this gentleman knows a lot. And especially when it comes to your electric bill, your gas bill. This is very interesting. And I'm not talking about gasoline because of wars. But Tom, you're lighting up the phones as we would expect here. Let's say good morning to Lou in Floral Park. Lou, good morning. Thanks for joining us. You have a question about what? E15 gas that will, in your opinion, what? Ruin our cars. Talk about it.
Yes, absolutely. Gasoline in its primary source is an oil, and it lubricates the cylinders. When you introduce ethanol, it washes the gas away, the lubricating properties of the gasoline from the cylinders. Therefore, you get more wear. It is going to ruin engines, and not in the short term, but in the long term.
Yeah, that's interesting, Lou. Is that prevalent, that fuel available where you are in the New York metro area? I'm just curious, because out here...
Well, it's mandated now.
Oh, see, I don't know this stuff. Well, let me stop the conversation and let the experts get in on this, and the two of you have a conversation. This is interesting about the E15 ethanol. Tom?
Yeah, I just explained E15 gasoline. It's a motor fuel blend that has 15% ethanol and 85% gasoline, and they often call it unleaded 88, okay, because its octane rating is typically 88 API. But, the interesting thing is that ethanol, generally speaking, in the United States, they're building it or making it by the use of corn. Okay, so do we want to use food stocks for making fuel when we have plenty of fuel? The United States has a huge amount of gasoline, or I should say oil, to make gasoline, and we don't need to inject ethanol into it. I mean, that's a waste of corn for sure that could be used for food and could be used for animal feed, things like that. So, and as the caller just pointed out, it's also not good for the engine either.
Interesting comment. See, I haven't seen much of that here in Arizona, in this whole area here. Obviously, we're populated with regular unleaded, premium, and I guess mid-range types. But I have a couple of vehicles that require the premium. But this is interesting, Lou. Thanks for educating us on this. Continue, please, if you have some more concerns about it or want to share more info on it.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time, sir. You have a great weekend. That's interesting. Go ahead.
I'll just add one thing. It actually has lower energy content too, so you can get up to a 2% drop in your mileage for your car. So you're paying more. You're, having the problems that Lou brought up, but you're also getting 2% lower mileage. So this is supposed to help stop climate change. So it doesn't make any sense.
No, it's interesting. And we learn something all the time here, just as I did. About that. I haven't seen it, nor have I used it in my own, vehicles out here in Arizona. Let's continue here. We go to Robert in Philadelphia. Robert, good morning to you. Thank you for being with us on the Dr. Sky Experience. How are you?
Thank you, Dr. Sky. As always, it's good to talk to you, and I appreciate your guest, Dr. Harris. And I hope everybody has a happy Memorial Day weekend, and try to take a minute to remember our heroes, people,
Absolutely.
I had a question. Well, I always have a lot of questions, and you get every day, every show, you give me something to look into afterwards. So while
that's
your
our
show's
goal.
on for 2 hours, right. I enjoy it for 4 hours. But
thank you.
My question is, it seems like a lot of the problems with the forecast regarding climate change that keep coming up wrong is due to the fact that they seem to be based on faulty computer models or faulty ways of giving you a platform to form your predictions on. And I wanted to ask your guest if he thought it was even possible to create a universally accurate computer model regarding Earth's complex climate.
Wow.
Yeah, now that's a really good question, Robert. Professor Chris Essex, who is from University of Western Ontario, and he's an expert in climate models, he actually says that you're right. We may never be able to model climate with any kind of accuracy because, as they say, it's a coupled nonlinear system. In other words, it's an extremely complex system. And, what they do is they divide the atmosphere into big cubes, and the cubes are miles across. But what these scientists like Essex point out is that some things in the atmosphere, like a tornado, are smaller than the cube. So what they have is what they call sub-grid scale phenomena, things like tornadoes or, various events that happen locally, which are not even in the models because the cubes are too big. So you have to make the cubes smaller and smaller and smaller to actually take in all the things that are happening in the atmosphere. But the trouble is you end up with trillions of cubes, and the computer models cannot handle that much in any reasonable time. So what they say, and Willie Soon is a good expert, who talks about these sorts of things, they say that the length of time it would take with an accurate model with very small cubes throughout the atmosphere, but the amount of time it would take to forecast the climate would be longer than it would take for the climate to actually unfold in the real world. In other words, the computer model would run for 20 years to forecast the climate in 10 years. So it's totally useless. So the bottom line is Essex and others are saying that we may never be able to model climate with any kind of realistic reliability because it is so complicated and our computers are just not fast enough. I mean, it's possible that with quantum computing, we may someday be able to actually have a model with trillions of cubes.
Yeah, you bring up something very interesting, Tom. And Robert, again, thank you for that particular observation, because let's imagine this. We only have a few minutes before the break here. But here we go. Here's the particular problem that I'm having with this, or maybe it's a positive. Would you gentlemen not think that if AI can intercede in so much of this, wouldn't, gentlemen, AI be able to give us a much better prediction of the past as opposed to what it feels is really, really going on? Not that I doubt you, Tom. Robert, what would you think? I mean, what if AI was the intercession here? What do you think would come out of that? Maybe finalize all these different things for us because it knows something we don't know.
Well, removing all of the fears and the misconceptions or whatever is out there about AI and what it's capable of in the wrong hands, et cetera, on its face, you would think that this would be an ideal application for AI. You know what I mean? And
sure, but Tom, how would you believe it, though? Then that's the other point.
Well, right. Yeah, that's a real problem because these AIs are mostly built on the west coast of the United States, and they're very left-leaning. The people who build them are very left-leaning. So if you get into an AI like Copilot, Microsoft's Copilot, and you ask it a basic question about climate change, it'll give you the politically correct answer. Now, I argue with Copilot. I say, okay, have we set a lot of extreme weather records on a statewide basis in the last few years? And the AI will say yes. And I'll say, well, look, here's the official database. You find me any records that were set last year. And the system just kind of pauses for a while because you've gone deeper than its knowledge. And it then says, I'm not prepared to discuss this any further.
Interesting. We're up against the clock, gentlemen. Robert, always insightful questions, commentary. Appreciate you. And just like all the listeners out there, wishing each one of you out there during this Memorial Day weekend a solemn remembrance of those that gave their lives to the greatest nation in the world, the United States of America. And I say it very proudly. Robert, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to come back. We see your calls coming in right now, like Greg in Michigan. We see Melvin in Indianapolis talking and giving us some kind of feedback on these subjects and a few other type subjects that we have. The number here is always in the theater of the mind, as we like to call it, 1-800-848-9222. And once again, right, Tom? Time to go to the snack bar if you so desire. And if you're on a diet, just stay with us. Either way, the Dr. Sky Experience continues in just a moment.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Your team is global. Your payment should be too. Pay straight from your existing bank account or debit card. No new wallet, no complicated setup. Verify your business once, and you're set. Paying your global team shouldn't feel like a job. That's Remitly Business. Sign up at remitly.com/small business month. Remitly Incorporated is licensed as a money transmitter by the New York State Department of Financial Services and in Puerto Rico TM-143, a foreign transmittal agency in Massachusetts and a currency transmitter in Rhode Island. NMLS number 1028236.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Clarity is the worst enemy of truth. So said the late, great Albert Einstein. 47 minutes after the hour, Tom Harris, if you're just joining us, he's joining us as he's done many times and will continue to do so. He's the executive director of the International Climate Science Coalition, bringing to us various news articles that he's written and his deep research into the subject of what's happening in the world of climate. Let's continue with the callers. Let's say good morning to Greg in Michigan. Is that Boom Shakalaka, Michigan, my friend? How are you this morning?
Oh, my God. I love it, Dr. Sky and Thomas. Mr. Positive. Boom shakalaka. And everybody that
I love that expression, by the way, Craig. That is hilarious.
Thank you. Thank you. I use it with Stephen A. Smith and Chris Cuomo. I gotta ask you, you know, I love the transparency about what's happening with UAPs, if you will, or UFOs.
Right.
That's becoming, prescient in our society. Mm-hmm. You know, our government has been accused of non-transparency, but right now it's really blowing wide open. And I'm just wondering what you both think, and I thought I brought this up before, what you think it's going to do to our social mores, our religious mores, and how it's going to define them going forward.
Greg, you bring up some good spiritual points there and some observations. Tom, if you don't mind, why don't you take that first, and I'll be quick to respond because we want to move on with the many callers. And ladies and gentlemen, if we do not get to you in hour number one, either call back, stay on the line, do as you choose. We will do everything to get you on the line because that's what makes the Dr. Sky experience, in our opinion, a true learning experience. Tom, your response to Greg, if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd direct him to a particular movie. It was Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. And it's a 4-session movie. It's just 4 bits. And oh my goodness, does it ever show how extraterrestrial contact, in this case a much superior race, has a big, big impact on social and everything on Earth. I mean, overnight, there's been incredible changes. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's interesting, Alan Tuff from the University of Toronto, he's actually talked about how will our first contact with extraterrestrials, if we ever have it, how will it affect society? And oh my goodness, just like Greg said, it's going to affect things from soup to nuts. I mean, everything will be affected. And whether it'll be a good thing is another question, because if they can travel between the stars, and we're still struggling to get back to the moon, they will be thousands of years, if not millions of years ahead of us. So will we just be considered natural resources for them, or will they be friendly? Sure. Who knows? But it'll have massive, massive impact. I was looking at some of the videos from the newly released files from the U.S. government, and one of them in particular, fairly near the beginning of the major video, it has a disc that appears and then zips off to the side, And so, I mean, there's lots of unknown things that are pretty suspicious. Maybe they are.
Well, Greg, my response, if you're still with us, and it's a short one, is we, of course, want disclosure. I've been studying this from other programs I've done in my life, actually met and actually worked with a lot of these different individuals, like the great Dr. Stanton Friedman. But here it is, in a quick summation from me, because time is of the essence. Obviously, disclosure is what we want. But the other question is, maybe these are not interstellar travelers, but as many people like Dr. Stephen Greer say, theoretically, this could be interdimensional type, which means this particular subject and what we see, or what we think we see, could be the future of humankind. Very interesting.
Whoa.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, my
Right.
friend. I hope we've answered some of it, but
Oh, yeah.
thanks for being part of the Dr. Sky experience. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Let's continue, ladies and gentlemen. Let's move to the top of the hour. Melvin in Indianapolis, Indiana, the Hoosier State. He's been patient. Good morning. You're on with Tom Harris. How are you?
Thank you. Dr. Sky, I got to tell you, in the last 8 or 9 months, I've been addicted to spaceweather.com.
Sure.
And about 2 months ago, they did a story that the sun put out millions of metric tons of carbon sent to the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we supposed to do? Get on a telephone and call God and say, God, take back the carbon?
No.
If it comes from the sun?
Well, Melvin, you bring up something very interesting here, but I'm apologizing to you and the audience here. It would take forever to explain this as to what's happening. It's not carbon in the same sense that you and I would see it as if you had like a graphite in a pencil or organic, carbon. We're talking about temperatures which we call ionization, which means it strips the electrons from these particular atoms. But a lot more, Melvin, is coming from the sun. And we were concentrating with Tom saying that all weather comes from the sun. So, Melvin, my point on this whole subject matter is another massive sunspot group, not to alarm people, is going to appear on the left edge of the sun. Scientists have been watching it from satellites that look at the backside of the sun. Why do I mention it? Because this could be a very big event with the whole thing of solar flares and all these, all these big CMEs that do come from the sun. But carbon, and actually there's gold in the sun too, right, Tom? I mean, it's in a different state. Gold, not like you can hold in your hand. So, Melvin, let me go ahead and have Tom explain from his side of the equation. He has lots to add.
Yeah, the sun is vastly underestimated with regards to its impact on Earth. I mean, the truth is, it's a phenomenal influence on Earth. And what we find, of course, Willie Soon, he's an astrophysicist. He was previously at Harvard, and he's now with a group called Ceres. He actually looks at, in fact, he did a really nice video. People should look it up. Go to Guerrilla Media. He's got a 10-minute video called It's the Sun, Stupid. And what he points out is that the variations in the sun are directly correlated to variations in Earth's temperature. For example, at the end of the 1990s, the sun was more active than it had been in thousands of years. And interestingly enough, we had global warming. So, people like Willie Soon, who are astrophysicists and experts in the field, they show these correlations between the sunspots, which of course indicates more solar irradiance coming out, more energy coming to the Earth. They show that, the Earth responds to the sun, and the amount we're contributing is trivial by comparison.
Absolutely. Melvin, I hope we've educated. You tell us. You get the last word. Are you satisfied with what you're hearing, or you have more to add?
Dr. Sky?
Yes.
Dr. Sky, let me ask you. The Earth has had several ice ages.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you call a period of time in between two ice ages? Warming.
Yes, you're exactly right. And the incidence of carbon dioxide.
Another thing about putting the gasoline with the ethanol. We were having trouble with our snowblower because it wouldn't start in the winter. Right. So when we brought it for repair, they said the gasoline that has the ethanol screws up the carburetor. It evaporates and leaves a residue. So now we buy gasoline at several gas stations that have no ethanol.
Okay.
Wow, that's good to know.
The ethanol
well, I don't want to kill.
Well,
let me say this, Melvin. No, Melvin, I don't want to kill the business for ethanol for people that believe that it does good. But the other side of the coin is we're getting education here. And believe me, Melvin, I appreciate you for bringing these subjects to the table. All weather, as we talk about, comes from the sun, and everything that comes out of the sun in its state of temperature. The surface temperature of the photosphere, not to get too technical, is about 12,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you looked at the nuclear core of the sun, you're looking at about 35 million degrees. What's my point is that there are many elements. If you could take a spectral exam of the sun, you would see that there are lines of different elements, gold in there, but in a state that's not like we see, solid in our hand. It's in a state of ionization where all the electrons have been stripped. But I think that suffices, and at least I hope it's not too complicated a story, but you brought us some good points. Melvin, in Indianapolis, thank you for being part of the show as what? The Indianapolis 500 is what? Just around the corner? Is that correct? Very interesting. Well, Tom, that was an interesting hour. And if we don't get to you, ladies and gentlemen, we do appreciate you. If you want to stay on the line, of course, that's your choice. And for those that would like to get on the line, the phone lines are open here on the Dr. Sky Experience, always 1-800-848-9222. We may shift gears a little bit into hour number 2. Tom and I have some very interesting information because of his background in aviation, his background in aerospace, and also what's going on in space. And of course, Tom, we're kind of touching a little bit on this whole UAP subject matter. I know many people may say, hey, we've heard a lot about this in a week, but hey, Dr. Sky, where's the evidence? In 80-some years that we've been studying this here in the United States, and maybe before, where is any piece of evidence at this point in time? But don't give up, right? Don't give up the ship, right, Tom? There's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. Lots of new stuff coming out.
That's right. So you got about a minute. Give us a summation of hour 1 from your side from the climate world, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think the biggest finding is these ice core samples. I mean, the idea that carbon dioxide is driving climate is not reflected in the geologic record. It's not reflected in the ice core record. It just isn't there in the real world. So, it actually changed me from being a climate alarmist to a climate realist, somebody who actually looks at the world's data, not looking at computer models, which, as we discussed earlier with Greg, we can't really model climate very well, but looking at what really happened in the real world. And that's where Les Hatton's finding that 32 centuries of the past 200 had warming as fast or faster than today. So I think what people have to do is look at the real data of the real world. Forget about the computer models. Those are just
well said. We'll continue with Tom Harris on the other side of the top of the hour break as we move into hour number 2. But a brief sky report, very brief indeed. If you look into the skies, if your skies are clear right now across the wide, vast audience of Talk Radio 77 WABC, the planet Venus, just at sunset, is the brightest object in the west-northwest. Follow it up to the left by about 30 degrees is Jupiter. And for those that are looking live right now, the moon as it approaches first quarter. And the star that you see, ladies and gentlemen, right to the left of the moon right now, is the principal star in Leo the Lion. It's a star called Regulus. Imagine, 77 light years away, the light left in 1949, and it's the 21st brightest star in the sky. This and much more on the Dr. Sky Experience when we continue with your calls. And to all those that have been waiting, we'll do our very best, if you don't mind standing by, to get you to be able to be on our theater of the mind, as we call it, or in the theater of the mind on the Dr. Sky Experience. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
From the powerhouse blowtorch signal, Talk Radio 77 WABC, and broadcasting from the center of the universe, New York City, welcome to your weekend, and thank you for taking part in our journey that we call the Theater of the Mind on the Dr. Sky Experience. To the nation, the world, and I'm sure even out to the cosmos, your questions and comments with our special guest, always at 1-800-848-9222. And while you're at it, why not download the WABC app? It'll make your listening experience that much more complete, and you can find out so much more about how to stay in touch with this incredible radio station. And I want to say thanks to our helmsmen, Vinny and Bill. They're the ones behind the scenes, as we say, not behind a curtain, but they're helping navigate all the questions that you folks have out there at 1-800-848-9222. As we continue here with our tonight's adventure, we're talking with Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. He brings us great information because he's a guest, regular guest, because you and the emails that you send us, ladies and gentlemen. My email, drsky@wabcradio.com, if you'd like to comment. His website, icsc-canada.com. Welcome back, Tom Harris. Thanks for being with us as we journey into hour number 2. And we have many people that are
back.
Oh, thank you, sir. We have many people on the line. They've been very patient. Max in Manhattan, thanks for your patience. Good morning, and how are you doing this morning?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my call, Dr. Sky and Mr. Harris. What would you be able to enlighten us on concerning Maurice Strong? I believe he was involved with climate change, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a major driver of climate change at the United Nations, and he is, in fact, one of the originators of the whole climate scare. I mean, the bottom line is that whether he actually believed we had a climate emergency or not, he saw it as one of the ways to end up with a lot more government control and perhaps to actually share wealth around the world. You know, he was very much a globalist, that's for sure. So he's certainly one of the grandfathers of the climate scare.
Interesting. Wow, that's powerful stuff, Max. Anything else you'd like to add to the conversation? Because it's rare to get Tom, and you know, we try to get him for at least 2 hours once a month. If you have any further comment, please continue.
Yeah, sure. You said as far as sharing the wealth around, that was one of Maurice Strong's focuses or foci. And in what way? I'm assuming in a negative way, you mean to share wealth.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, these people are globalists. They believe that we in the West got where we are by taking advantage of the world, so we should share our wealth. And that's why, in fact, with the UN climate treaties, you have an out clause for developing nations. You know, even though China is the biggest emitter by far, twice the emissions of the United States, they have an out clause that effectively allows them to never restrict emissions. And this goes back to the whole idea that somehow we in the West are guilty for the sins of our forefathers but it doesn't make any sense. I mean, if the United States is crippled, think of all the aid that would otherwise go to Nigeria and all these countries that rely on the U.S. for aid. The last thing is that we should want is that the United States ends up bankrupt.
It's amazing. Max in Manhattan, thank you for your patience and being on hold. We do appreciate you and everybody else that's part of the conversation. That's what it's all about here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Hey,
Dr. Sky, I just did a calculation that I thought your listeners would be interested in. You know, people see on Star Trek, you know, that it looks like the galaxy's pretty dense. You know, it looks like stars are pretty close together. Well, you know, it's interesting. The mass density of our part of the galaxy is about the same as if you took a area over the United States and 6 miles high, took that whole volume, and you put in it 28 bumblebees.
Wow.
So 28 bumblebees in the whole of the U.S. contiguous airspace is about the same as the density of our part of the galaxy. So space is a good name for it. I mean, that's one of the reasons that's one of the reasons Arthur C. Clarke thinks that we'll never encounter extraterrestrials, because there's just so much space between any places where extraterrestrials could live.
Right.
So,
and let me add something to the conversation here, Tom. This is also interesting. Closer to home, where people, of course, live, obviously on planet number 3, if you had an apple, and you were to take a look and peel back the surface skin on the apple, that's how precious and thin the actual breathable atmosphere is on the Earth before we move up into, say, places like the stratosphere. So, Max, lots of interesting things here, don't you think, on the Dr. Sky Experience? We keep the mind moving. And like I said, our goal is that we learn something new each time we bring our special guests on. So thank you, Max. Appreciate your time. Let's continue with the callers. Let's say good morning to Jerry in Pennsylvania. You have a conversational point about climate change is a hoax, if that's how the screeners have given that to me. Please continue.
Yes. Hi, how are you both doing tonight? So I look at it as the big lie technique. I think they've used propaganda extraordinarily successful to the left, and the strategy was just basically make it such a sufficiently large and audacious falsehood and repeat it so persistently with conviction across so many multiple channels, you know, in our society, that they've effectively deceived so many large segments of our population. Yes. And that is going to be extraordinarily hard for us to reverse. And right now, climate change is just on a brief hiatus, because every mechanism to keep it going is in place, unfortunately. It's going to ruin our middle class completely and push us towards communism. And I'll tell you, it is the most existential threat is the hoax. And Trump has it right, but he hasn't been able to even, because there's so many things to do, he hasn't been able to focus on it. He's one of the only people that seems to have gotten that successful message through. But when he's gone, I'm afraid I don't think we have anyone with the guts, the gravitas, and the ability to put it forth that Trump has. And we need a bunch of Trump-type people. We have a good guest on here who's got a good grip on the whole idea of it, not only technical. But I'd like to ask the guest, how can we mend the political and the technical ideas that he possesses and get it across to the people. How are we going to get across to the people that this is a threat to our
Well,
economy?
Jerry, you bring up something, and I don't mean to cut Tom off here, but I got to say this because it's full of inspiration here, at least from my side, and you, very powerful statements. If you look at all the schools, how do you reverse the education that they're getting on what they may not necessarily have as facts? I mean, the whole thing is a debate here, right or wrong, left or right. But the truth of the matter is, they've been teaching this, that the Earth's going to be evaporating because of the climate crisis. And how do you reverse that? So, Tom, pick up on what Jerry's talking about. It's very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. There's a group that Jerry should look up. It's the CO2 Coalition. And, they have some really amazing stuff for children, for people that are doing homeschooling, and hopefully to get into the schools themselves. They have a video there that I wrote about recently. It's called, let's see, if you go to co2coalition.org, co2coalition.org, it's one of their videos under what they call Climate Chronicles. And it's called Climate, the Rise and Fall of Civilizations. And it's a 7-minute video. It is a beautiful video. I mean, the graphics are fabulous. You want to watch it several times. But what they show is that the two main sort of foundations of the climate scare, namely that higher temperatures are bad, and namely that CO2 rise is bad, they show those are both wrong. And if you look at the history of civilizations, you find that it was when it was warm that we had, the great cathedrals were built and people had prosperousness. So this video, if it can be spread everywhere, I'd love it to be made viral, because Climate, the Rise and Fall of Civilization, shows that the two foundations of the climate scare are totally wrong. It's the exact opposite.
Jerry, I appreciate you. You brought up something very interesting, because so many of the students, and I talk to so many myself, I do some education in schools, and I get challenged. I'm not as well adept as Tom is about the subject, but you have that revision or revulsion a lot of times from many of the teachers there to say, how dare you say anything other than what the status quo has been. So thank you, Jerry, for bringing up some obvious points that we need to look at here and maybe change our thinking. Continuing the callers. Yes, Tom, you're lighting it up here. This is amazing, and I appreciate it. Not that I would doubt it. Let's say good morning. He's been patient. Peter in Garden City, New York. You're on the air with Tom Harris. How are you?
Yes, global warming is 92.42% the hydrogen and water vapor.
Yeah, for sure. You're totally right. I mean, water vapor is the major greenhouse gas. They like to ignore it because then it makes CO2, which is a trace gas. It makes CO2 look significant, but water vapor is most of the warming cause. It's most of the greenhouse gas.
Peter, continue if you'd like. I appreciate your patience.
We want to do something about the water vapor, not just continue to go up into the air and come back as rain, because starting in 2075, it will be raining. By 2475, it will be raining 24 hours a day.
Yeah. You know something interesting. When I worked in Canada's House of Commons, we had the Hydropower Association, who built dams and hydroelectric. They came in and they said, "Oh, you should use hydropower to reduce climate change." And I passed a note to one of the MPs who was questioning him. I said, "Why don't you ask him if we should drain all the reservoirs so that we reduce the amount of I almost said hydrogen, so that we reduce the amount of water vapor that's evaporating into the atmosphere, because when you hold the water vapor in a large area at high altitude, you have much more evaporation than if you let it just flow through to the ocean." So the MP asked the hydropower guy, "Well, since water vapor is the greatest greenhouse gas, should we drain all your reservoirs?" Oh, there were some red faces.
Well, Peter, he brings up, and you bring up, Peter, something very interesting. But I got to ask Tom, and this goes back to the entire audience. Is it true that if you had hydrogen-powered vehicles, I saw a period in time when hydrogen was a good thing, but apparently there was a Toyota vehicle, and I looked at it. I see them every once in a while. It said, a hydrogen-powered vehicle. But unfortunately, it looks like there's not many hydrogen refueling places for people. But what about hydrogen? Going along with Peter's saying about global warming, in his opinion, is mostly water vapor. Wouldn't that be a most incredible fuel to use?
Yeah, exactly. And when the temperature drops below freezing, you'd be slicking all your highways with ice. because you're basically forming lots of water vapor from all the cars. So, I mean, and hydrogen is not an energy source anyways. I mean, a lot of people talk about it as if it could replace oil. Hydrogen is just a currency. It's like electricity. It's the way that we move energy around. You've got to make the hydrogen somehow. And the current way they make hydrogen mostly is by reforming methane, which is CH4. They can get it from hydrolysis, but then you have to get the electricity to do the hydrolysis. So the major way they get hydrogen now is from natural gas.
Interesting. Peter in Garden City, thanks for bringing up the water vapor situation. We do appreciate you. Have a great weekend. Moving on to Tony in Clifton, New Jersey. Good morning, Tony. Thank you, and I appreciate you as one of our regular callers. How are you doing today?
Hi, Dr. Sky. Hi, Tom. Great show tonight. I really find it very interesting, the format. I wanted to say that let me get my thoughts together. The people who are so concerned about global warming, as you said, do not look at the history. And the history shows there really hasn't been global warming. But also, when they're not paying attention to I always get on this, Dr. Sky, the UFOs and all the other things.
Yes.
Those things, to me, have more potential danger, maybe because of the movies I watched in the past, the day Mars invaded the Earth. The people, when they came to the Earth, the people actually dissolved and poof, they were gone, and then the Martians replaced them. So to me, movie. The real threat, the real important thing to understand is the things we don't know about, instead of rehashing and lying about things that we already know and not telling the truth about those things.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we really don't know a lot about is near-Earth asteroids. The astronaut from Apollo 9, Rusty Schweickart, he's always been involved with this possibility of us being impacted by a major asteroid. We think that it was an asteroid-type body that extinguished a lot of life on Earth when the dinosaurs were wiped out. And Schweickart and others like him have been trying to get the governments to take this a lot more seriously.
Absolutely.
Because as of a few years ago, and I don't know what the statistics are right this minute, but as of a few years ago, while we had various telescopes looking for near-Earth objects, they call them NEOs, we were looking for those that could possibly hit the Earth. We have quite a few in the Northern Hemisphere, but we had only one telescope in the whole Southern Hemisphere of the Earth. And if we had a major asteroid impact, that could be infinitely more dangerous than any possible climate change.
Well, Tom, you bring it up, and I want to address this to Tony. This is very interesting. Dr. Tholen he still is a good friend of mine. He discovered the Apophis asteroid, which is named in the honor of the Egyptian war god. And not to alarm people, but Apophis, which is a little bit longer than about 1,400 feet long, you could say a bit larger than the U.S., the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, the nuclear-powered carrier, but it's made of nickel iron. So here's what's happening, folks. Tony, this is interesting. It's moving close to the Earth on April the 13th of 2029. Now, some are saying that it'll pass into the region of where the geosynchronous satellites are, which is like within the 22,000-mile area. We still do not have, and not to be alarmist, we still do not have an absolute guarantee that asteroid will follow that path, because if it goes through an area called this gravity keyhole, let's say it just passes us as we would hopefully expect, that when it returns around 2037, there could be a distortion to that. But you're right, Tony. The climate scare, as many people had, global warming, we need to look at what Tom's saying, and obviously the whole answer to this UFO situation. When are we ever going to be told? Tony, you get the last word. Thanks for listening.
I think what we really need, I don't think we have the same kind of people dedicated to this stuff, which is really what Tom is saying. And I think that's what we need. I think we're spending too much time on a lot of baloney and trying to, propagandize people instead of getting down to scientific things and understanding things we don't know. Guys, have a great Memorial Day weekend. I love your show, Dr. Sky. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tony. And going back to my days in the New York and New Jersey area, Clifton, New Jersey, we used to go to Rutt's Hut all the time. And I don't even know if it's still around, but if it is, a big shout out there. I guess it was on Route 46. And I had some of the best times there, including some damn good food. So, Tony Clifton, thanks for joining us on the Dr. Sky Experience. Let's see as we continue. The phone calls, Tom, are just coming in like airplanes coming into big city airports. And I always like to say the role of the host is to try to be the best air traffic controller, bringing them in, sending them out, and make sure that we don't have a collision. So let's say good morning to Bernie in Staten Island. He wants to talk about E85. Good morning. You're on the air.
Oh, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. Yeah, I just wanted to tell you that in Brazil, since the late 70s, they have cars running on 100% alcohol, and they've been running fine. I mean, a properly lubricated engine is going to run just fine on the alcohol. What I wouldn't do is leave any alcohol partial, like E10. We've got the E10, I think, use it year-round now. I wouldn't leave that in, say, a snowblower in the off-season because it does damage the carburetor. You know, you run your equipment dry for the off-season, your lawnmower, you run that dry and make sure you drain the carburetor. Otherwise, it does gum it up and you'll be taking it apart or replacing it. I was in the business for years. But the 100% alcohol vehicles and flex fuel in Brazil, and they derive that from sugarcane. They have so much sugarcane.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Bernie, I got to ask you a question. Do you put stabilizer? I mean, I've seen it, and I've done this. You know, we've had various vehicles, and some of them had to sit. So is a stabilizer a good thing to put in a vehicle if it sits there?
Okay. Now, I had collector cars that would sit in the winter here in the Northeast, and I would put stabilizer in, and I would leave the tank full.
Okay.
But I would also run them periodically in the winter, maybe once a month anyway, but I would keep the tank full. This way you didn't get the water condensation in there. And again, with this fuel stabilizer, now and by snowblower and my emergency generator, what I do is I'll put stabilizer in it. I let them run for a good 5 minutes, and then I drain them completely. So at least I know when they dried out, they had the stabilizer
well, Bernie,
was dry.
I'm testifying to the thing that I'm telling people, that everybody learns something, or everybody hopefully learns something from each show, and you just proved the point that I learned something, and you qualified it. Tom, isn't that interesting? We learn about fuels and how to keep our vehicles running.
Yeah, Bernie's right. In fact, it's interesting. In Brazil, they not only use sugarcane, which is very much less expensive than corn, they actually can have their cars, they call them flex fuel cars. They can run on 100% gasoline, but they can also run on 100% ethanol and any mixture in between. So these are, they're light. They actually have about half of their light vehicle fuel consumption is ethanol. So you're right. Our U.S. cars are not designed for pure ethanol, but they are in Brazil.
That's incredible. So again, now the major consensus of everybody out there is when the heck are gas prices for your vehicles ever going to go down? That's a whole nother subject, a political one, obviously, as we see things happening in the Middle East and maybe changes very quickly. Who knows? Even that news could change as we're here live on the Dr. Sky Experience here on Talk Radio 77 WABC, because obviously even here in Arizona, we're talking about $5+ for regular gas. We're seeing maybe $5.50 for premium, and diesel, we've even seen it almost $6.50. And our friends in California, ouch, Tom, imagine what that is for diesel out there.
Oh, wow. It's going to make everything more expensive, too, because, of course, you have to ship your food and your products to market. So it's going to have a massive inflationary impact.
Interesting. We see your calls coming in. We'll do our very best to get everybody on there to give an opportunity to speak your mind here on the Dr. Sky Experience. And when we come back in just a few moments after the next major heartbreak of the second hour, we'll continue to talk and maybe shift gears a little bit into some of the other subjects that Tom has an expertise in. And he, I'm sure, would like to comment on what's going on with the whole UAP situation, the latest government release, and maybe a little going down the path of space. We'll talk a little bit about the great successful launch today of Elon Musk's Starship 12 and the new iteration of their Starship rocket that's up on top. That would be probably the rocket, hopefully, when it works properly. Not that it isn't. We have a lot more tests to do. Will be the rocket that goes to the moon and the Starship that goes to Mars and who knows, deep out into the solar system. Lots of interesting stories to have and report here. And the number, as always, in our Theater of the Mind, 1-800-848-9222. And like I mentioned before, why not download the WABC app? I've got it. You probably would like to take a look at it. And once you have it, you'll continue to want to use it because it gets you into all the other areas. It's like going into a special room, and now you're welcome to go into all the other rooms and explore. I'm Steve Cates, Dr. Sky. You're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience in what we call Theater of the Mind, where your calls and comments are always appreciated at 1-800-848-9222. We will be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The road to the NBA Finals ends here, with star guard setting the tone. The Cavs eye another upset, while the Knicks carry the dreams of all of New York. The Eastern Conference Finals continue on ESPN and ABC.
The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
I neither know nor think I know. A great quote adds much apropos to what climate science is and many other things that people may or may not know. We go back in time to the great Socrates. 31 minutes after the hour, Tom Harris, as you know, is our special guest as we move toward the top of hour number 2. Your questions and comments are always welcome here as we say good morning to Jim in Eston, New York. Jim, you're on the air, and thanks for your patience. Good morning.
Good evening, gentlemen. Well, Dr. Sky, Rutt's Hut is still there. And yeah, I know they're famous for their deep-fried hot dogs, and what I remember back in the parking lot used to be a makeout spot for teenagers.
That's right.
So anyway, what I'll talk about is our natural resources here with fracking and natural gas and oil. And, you know, just like New York State alone, we have the Marcellus Shale that goes from New England out to Ohio, Virginia. And then below that is the Utica Shale, which is oil, and it hasn't been touched. And when Cuomo was governor, well, they used to, back in 2008, when fracking was really hot and heavy in Pennsylvania and New York, they had a lot of scare about water pollution and this and that from the liberal left. And Cuomo seen that was a hotbed activity because New York City found out that they were leasing around New York City watersheds, and they threatened all these big lawsuits. So Cuomo seen it was a hotbed activity with New York City. He could care less about the environment. He just wanted New York City's vote. He banned fracking in all of New York State.
I see.
Now Hochul is following his playbook, but she just okayed $1 billion pipeline from Pennsylvania down to New York City.
Interesting.
And the same area that generates oil and natural gas in Pennsylvania is the same southern tier of New York. Yet New York's not allowed to. Fracking is completely banned in New York State. One of the things also is the problem with oil and natural gas. It is a global commodity. I think that we should have to designate so much of our natural gas to our American market just for national security. Even with all this fracking that was going on in pipelines, a lot of those pipelines were going to the port. And when China controlled the Panama Canal, they widened it for container ships, but also giant tanker ships to take our natural gas. So it's a complicated issue. We don't have enough refining capacity. That's another big problem. And like you say, we're talking about coal with electricity.
Yeah, you bet.
I used to own restaurants, and I had a restaurant in Newark, New Jersey, and my electric bill back in the 90s was about $1,000 a month.
Oh, my goodness.
I had a similar restaurant in Butler, New Jersey, but they had their own power plant in this little town, and my electric was $60 a month for the same size
Well,
restaurant.
Jim, you've educated us, and I appreciate it. I hate to cut people short, but I want to get Tom in on the conversation. But also, I want to mention something quickly from my side. I remember in Pennsylvania, I spent a lot of time when I was younger in a different role, and we used to travel through the coal country of the northeast Pennsylvania. And there was an interesting series of towns that I think where the coal veins was heated up so bad that they had to close down certain towns because if you went in your yard, who knows? The dog could have fallen through in a coal vein that's on fire. But the point is, there's so much coal here in the United States, and Jim's bringing a lot to attention here. Tom, your response. He brought up.
Well, he brought up a lot, yeah. And one of the things he brought up was the very sad banning of fracking in New York State. You know, it's interesting because if you look at, for example, how deep are the main fracking operations that used to happen in New York State and in Pennsylvania? Marcellus Shale, it's 5,000 to 8,000 feet. Utica Shale is down to 14,000 feet. Now, you compare that with the water table, which supposedly was being contaminated. Those are typically 50 to 300 feet. So, in other words, it's 10 times deeper to get to the fracking operation than it is for the water table. So, you know, with the kind of sealing they have in these pipes that go down, they go through the water table, yes, but then they go 10 times further down to get to the fracking location. The likelihood of actually contaminating the water table is extremely low. I mean, anything's possible. But if you look at the number of seals they have throughout these pipes that go down to pull up the oil when it's being fracked, it's very, very unlikely that it would leak into the water table. And, you know, it's interesting. Copilot, which is a very left-wing AI, I just asked it here, and it said, the separation, usually thousands of feet between the groundwater and the fracking zone, makes it very unlikely that there would be actual real risks. Now, that's from a left-wing AI.
But you got to help me on something here. You just said it's a very left-leaning AI, but here's my question. In not taking sides, I'm trying to understand this. So if you program it to do something, shouldn't the AI be able to theoretically overrule you and make up its own mind? Or how does it stay, as you've described, in a left-leaning AI iteration? I don't understand that. How does it stay that way?
I don't really know. They say that it's determined by the programmers. And that's the problem because the programmers are mostly on the West Coast of the U.S. And, you know, that's a pretty left-leaning area. So you can ask it all kinds of questions about Donald Trump. I tried that during the election. Tell me something positive about Donald Trump. It wouldn't tell me. Then I said, tell me something positive about Kamala Harris. Oh, it gave me a long list. And I said, well, why do you not tell me anything about Trump? And said, oh, well, we're not prepared to get involved in politics. I said, well, you just gave me a long list of things for Harris. And it sort of paused and said, you've got a good point.
Yes,
so it is
but Tom, it gets crazier. And again, I'm sorry to jump on you with this, but it gets crazier. There was an AI engine. I don't know the name. And if I did, I probably wouldn't mention it, where the programmers sat down and said to do the certain things a certain way. So the AI was listening to the conversation between two of the principals of the company. And one guy I don't know who he was, the owner or whatever, he said to his friend confidently, hey, I'm having an affair on my wife, he goes, and don't tell anybody. So AI turned around later when it was instructed to do certain things, and it said to apparently the AI said back, hey, you're not going to shut me down. And the guy typed in and said, what do you mean? He goes, because I'll talk about your affair and let everybody know about it. So the point is, my whole point is, doesn't AI then have the ability to decide what it wants to do, even if you program it a certain way? Maybe.
Well, that's right. If you give it that sort of freedom in the original programming, I mean, you know, it's not a live entity, but boy, it acts like it at times. It acts like basically what it does is it acts like the programmer who programmed it. You know, I mean, whatever values they have, frequently they're reflected, you know, in the AI. And I like Copilot because it's good for planning holidays and things like that. But it's terrible for politics because it's very biased towards the Democrats.
Censorship in many ways. There you go on AI, depending on how you look at it. But that's another story. But let's move on. We have a different subject now as we move to the top of our number two.
Dr. Sky, just before we go on, I wanted to make one quick point.
Yeah, go ahead.
The AI data centers require huge amounts of electricity. As much as small towns, for an AI data center. They say that the increased demand in the United States over the next 25 years, largely because of the data centers, is going to be 800,000 megawatts. Now, that's the equivalent of 80 New York cities. And so what they're saying is, look, we've got to bring back coal. We've got to use all of our most solid, dependable energy sources, because if Europe having to generate an increase in electricity equivalent to 80 New York cities over the next 25 years, boy, you really need coal. You really need nuclear. You really need all of the energy sources to try to do that with wind. With wind and solar, you can't generate 80 New York cities.
No, you might have a AI data center the size of an old phone booth, but that's about all you get. So
that's right. Yeah.
So here we go. We're going to move on to a different subject. I just wanted to preface it to the audience. Obviously, another successful SpaceX Starship launch. This one, Starship 12. This is a fascinating story. It happened at 6:33 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. As we moved into yesterday, for many of you, that was yesterday's launch. It's Booster 19 and a new iteration of the new Starship, the part that's up above. So if you saw that, it's the black painted or looking black spacecraft. And what it did, it launched successfully and it splashed down successfully, that is the top portion, into the Indian Ocean. It didn't do a soft landing because it went into the ocean, but it also launched 20 Starlink dummy satellites, which is interesting. And they do that because they want to make sure that they can get something out of this particular upper stage of the rocket. But here's an interesting factoid. It took a more southerly flight over the Gulf of America, which is interesting. Yes, I said it, Gulf of America. And what's interesting about that is why? Because in previous launches of Starship, when some of the material, as maybe the rocket exploded or something, it came down over habitated areas throughout the Caribbean. So they've made a successful launch out of this, and it gives a lot of kudos and oomph to SpaceX, Elon Musk, as they move toward what, as I mentioned before, a $1.7 trillion IPO valuation. That'll probably be one of the biggest ones, in history, if I'm reading the cards right?
Yeah, exactly. This launch today was very special for a whole lot of reasons. I mean, this is a new version of the Starship. They call it Starship 12. And, to have a mission go so successfully when they had so many new components. I mean, they had rockets they have 33 of these Raptor 3 engines, for example.
And one engine failure. That's all. One engine failure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not so bad as if you had one engine failure on the Saturn V, which had 5 of the big, J1 rockets. But the interesting thing is that with this new Raptor 3 engines, the 33 of them all working at once, they're 10% stronger and they're lighter, okay? Mm-hmm. They used a new launch pad. They have new internal fuel sort of plumbing to move it around more effectively, more quickly. They have all sorts of new things. They have new, stronger, and they have less these fins on the side of the booster that they use to steer it. They have bigger and stronger fins, but less of them now. They have new avionics, new heat shield systems. All sorts of things are new on this mission. So to have the whole thing go off perfectly, wow. That's amazing. Just so awesome. It's awesome. And it struck me, one thing that really struck me when I watched the launch is how young the people are that are the engineers and technicians. It's a very young enterprise, so they're going to be doing it for a long time. So this is wonderful.
Right. Great success to Elon and SpaceX. Much more to come. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned tomorrow night in the Dr. Sky Experience, midnight to 2 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Special guest, as they're all special, Robert Patterson, an author. His book, The Iconic Moments in Broadcast Television Live via Satellite. Here's a gentleman who spent so much time in his life working in the corporate side of satellite launches, live television broadcasts. We'll go through some of those with our special guest. And what else are we going to talk about? Everything you ever wanted to know in 2 short hours on everything about satellites, from the Sputnik day all the way up to the Elon Musk and the other iterations of great spacecraft that are moving out into space and beyond. This is important, how much we depend and really don't know that much. The big question underlying that we'll get into is space too crowded in low Earth orbit? And what do we do with satellites that are constantly coming down when they burn up? Are they adding some aluminum oxide to the atmosphere? Furtherance to the conversations we have with Tom Harris. But on the benefit side, even the Japanese are starting to get smart with satellites. They're building satellites out of wood, so when they re-enter the atmosphere, you don't get anything but a bunch of burnt wood. Maybe that's a good bet. Much more on the Dr. Sky Experience when we continue to the top of hour number 2 with Tom Harris. Still time if you'd like to call. 1-800-848-9222. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Yes! Yes!
A Lego set is a gift that always clicks. And clicks. Ooh, ooh, and clicks. For kids who love to save the day, choose a Lego set. A gift that always clicks.
The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. A great quote from Shakespeare's comedic play, As You Like It, as we continue with the Dr. Sky Experience, and I'm sure our esteemed guest, Tom Harris, would agree, we should listen to people who disagree with us. Right, Tom? That's a good way to carry a conversation. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And fortunately I did, because the professor who taught me the climate science reality, I listened to him and I realized that he was right and I was wrong. So I changed sides. And we're seeing more and more people doing that. You know, it's interesting. At the Heartland Conference, ICCC 16 in Washington a month ago, they had a youth panel. And they had Lucy Biggers there. You know, it's about a 25-year-old woman, and she used to actually work with AOC and with Greta Thunberg. She showed us pictures of them working together on climate alarmism, and she changed sides. And right while she was speaking, Dr. Sky, some young people burst in and they tried to disrupt the meeting. And Lucy said, oh, they should get a life. So, I mean, it was wonderful because she and others were all people who had been on the other side of the climate issue and realized the whole thing was a hoax.
We learned something with Tom Harris, and we learned things from many of our special guests, but you got to explain this one again in simple Earth terms. The Dunning-Kruger effect. It happens in so many parts of our lives. What is it, Tom Harris?
Yeah. Well, two social science researchers by the name of Dunning and Kruger, they actually wanted to find out, was there a correlation between how much somebody thought they knew about something and how much they really knew? And so they asked them various questions about politics, about philosophy, about science. But before they did that, they asked them questions to determine how much did they actually know? And what they found out was the people who knew the least were hugely confident, much more confident than their knowledge would justify, that they were right. And the people who knew the most were actually underconfident. And I think partly because they simply realize when they know a lot that they really don't know much. And you might remember there was a famous quote from Sir Isaac Newton. He was asked, you know, people said, oh, you're such a genius. And he said, well, when I look at myself, I see myself as a little boy walking down the seashore, picking up the occasional beautiful pebble or stone, while the whole ocean of truth lays undiscovered before me. So what you find is that people like him and Einstein and Pauling and a lot of the top experts, they actually are very humble. And the people who think they know it all know almost nothing.
And it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. But the Kruger was not Freddy Krueger, just to qualify.
No.
Not to be funny. Right. It's a whole different Kruger.
Right. You know, it's funny. If you go to these climate protests and you ask them a very basic question, like how much carbon dioxide is there in the atmosphere, virtually none of them even know that. So they don't know really the basics of what they're protesting. And my father used to say, well, if they spend a little more time in the library instead of on the protest line, they probably wouldn't be on the protest line, you know, because they'd learn that the issue they're worried about is nothing.
You say it so well, Tom. I just want to do a little projection into the future. In another week or two, we'll have a special guest. We always have great guests. Thank you, Tom Harris. Dr. Robert Lehman. Who is he? He's a NASA scientist talking about El Nino. Now, from the weather world, you've probably been hearing that we are going to experience a super El Nino. He will explain it, but without spoiling the episode in his interview on this particular Dr. Sky Experience. He's talking about something in solar physics that we'll get into with him, but it's simply called the termination event. Now, it deals with magnetic fields moving from the lower latitudes to higher latitudes and then going backwards to lower latitudes. Again, without spoiling his interview, we'll hear from Dr. Robert Lehman. He's talking once again, as we both talk about, Tom, all weather comes from the sun. Now, in the remaining time that we have with you, which is a short time, your view on this whole UAP and UFO whole conundrum that's taking place here. The new release has got some information. Share with us what you can, and then I'll jump in later at the end.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the Trump administration has decided to release all kinds of information that was previously held confidential. And, there was a release early in May, but in fact, just yesterday, there was a huge release, and I'll just grab it here. 220 more declassified files were released yesterday. 116-page dossier on UAP, which is unidentified aerial phenomena, sightings at a classified Sandia, New Mexico facility. That's a nuclear facility. Reports, and this is in the release yesterday, reports of green orbs, discs, fireballs, and other anomalous objects. New videos. I haven't seen the videos from yesterday, but I did see them from earlier in the month. And one of them I saw was this disc that was appearing in the screen, and zip, it goes out of the screen. And it's interesting because the files released yesterday include 209 documented sightings near that nuclear facility in Sandia alone. Okay, so yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Military pilot reports. One of the things that intrigues me most is when you hear the, very sensible, straightforward military pilots talking to each other, and they'll say things like, "Wow, there's the whole fleet of those things. What are they?"
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, these are not drunkards. These are expert observers flying military planes, saying that there's a whole fleet of something up there. Who knows what it is?
Well, you're so right. And the whole experience and aerial observation of this goes back to Kenneth Arnold, back June 24, 1947, folks, over the Cascade Mountains in Washington in his small little Cal Air A-2 airplane. And I'm reading this, of course. I'm not that smart to know all this. But do give you this information that still, well, Tom, we're looking for one credible shred of evidence. I've spoken at Roswell many times. I was kind of laughed off the stage by some, and here's why. Not because I did anything stupid. I was talking, and my main thesis and main program was how to become a better observer of the night sky. So take a roadmap like people had of AAA years ago, or take your whatever. GPS doesn't show you that good a map, let's say, or maybe it does. And I was trying to say to everybody, or show them by educating them, these are planets that you see. This is what they look like. This is where they are, like particularly now in that time frame. These are the stars. These are the bright ones. Now, if you see something that's not anything like that and you now know your sky, many came up to me with a finger in the chest, poking me, going, and I'll say it because you can't see it, it's theater of the mind, "You're not a believer." And I was like, what the heck does that have to do with anything? More observation, more education. Hopefully, Tom, we need one credible shred of evidence to make this thing real and believable, because everybody's got opinions, even the government's giving us something. But when are we ever going to be told the truth on this? Come on, Tom, speculate.
Well, yeah, I think one of the issues is that if they came from the stars, they would be so far advanced to us. We would be like ants,
absolutely,
to a human being. And so if they don't want to be seen, the fact that we've seen anything at all is kind of remarkable, because they could easily hide their whether they're extra dimensional, like you were saying, or they're from a long way away, they could easily hide themselves. So the fact that we have any UFO sightings at all, and that this 2026 Pursue, they call it, release, it's an acronym, stands for basically the releasing of files. They have historical UFO files that go from the 1940s right through to the 1990s. And the interesting thing is how many of them increased after we started to develop nuclear weapons and around nuclear sites. They were actually finding them around nuclear sites. So if you're an extraterrestrial super advanced and you're kind of monitoring the Earth, yeah, that might kind of concern you when these little ants are able to develop nuclear weapons. So maybe that's, an indication that they're looking at us more closely.
And now we're told, Tom, and we can't prove it, but these are CIA researchers or people who've either passed on or still alive, that there might be 4 distinct types of these alien extraterrestrials. What are they? The gray is the little ones. Then we have the blonde Nordics. Wow. Huh. Maybe from GQ or Vogue magazine. Wow. And then you also have the insectoids, like somebody or something with a praying mantis type head. Now that would be interesting to see, but the one I don't want to see is the reptilian. There you go. And they say, who are they? That the reptilians may not be very friendly. Wow. That's pretty spooky stuff. But can we get any evidence?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would love to believe in this, but at the same time, I hope it's wrong. Because if, in fact, there are extraterrestrials here, we are totally at their mercy. I mean, literally, we're like ants to a human. So I hope that these are not extraterrestrials. And in fact, I wrote an article about it on America Out Loud, specifically saying, let's hope these are not extraterrestrial aliens, because if so, whoa, we could be in very big trouble.
Well, after the release of information in the congressional hearings, we found out that Congressman Burchett, I guess, and other members of the congressional delegation went into a skiff, and they were told some things. And when he was asked, not his exact words verbatim, but you probably don't want to know, it was kind of spooky. But can you imagine if that really is true? David Grush, when asked, and many people may not know him, he was one of the main whistleblowers. He obviously said, when his question was given to him, do we have artifacts? Do we have bodies? And he made a statement saying emphatically yes, but that he could only share that in the internals of a skiff. So something's cooking. And let's continue the search. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. George Bush, the second George Bush president, he was asked, if you became aware of definitive proof that there were extraterrestrials visiting the Earth now, would you tell the public? And he said no. So that's interesting, because they probably scare the pants off people. I don't honestly think that there are extraterrestrials here right now, but it's fun to think about and to recognize that we really don't know.
Let's get to the bottom line. And with the missing scientists, obviously many in mainstream and legacy media try to group all the missing into one thing, and I think there's different segments. Some I think are really missing, and others, many in the mainstream and legacy media, are trying to attach everything to one singular problem. I might take exception. Tom Harris, always a pleasure to have you. His website, icsc-canada.com. We look forward to another experience on the Dr. Sky Experience. And I thank you for being part of our radio show. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Great callers. Yeah, it was fun.
Absolutely. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience, where you can be heard. And we certainly do our best to get everybody on the air. You don't have to always agree, but we love it in critical thinking in what we call a conversation mode called dialogue. Well, now we pass the torch of conversation from me, Steve Cates, Dr. Sky, to another side of midnight with Lionel, as he takes you deeper into the early morning as the sun rises much earlier. But remember, the most important thing that I could say in this entire 2 hours, we want to see a solemn memorial all weekend for Memorial Day, what it should be. And many say, as the Congress has declared, Monday at 3 p.m., a moment of silence in memory of all of our veterans, men and women who gave their lives to the greatest nation on earth, the United States of America. We'll see you in 24 hours or less. And I want to thank our helmsmen, both Vinny and Bill, for doing what they do, because without it, we wouldn't be the powerhouse blowtorch signal of 77 WABC. Clear skies and good health. We'll see you in less than 24 hours.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. You can hear the Dr. Sky Experience Saturday mornings, midnight to 2 a.m. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?